Okay, let's take a look at the characteristics of life. These are all the qualities of living organisms that scientists say they all need to have in order for them to really qualify as a living organism. I'll be highlighting the 8 characteristics that all living organisms must exhibit in order for us to consider them to be living. Characteristic number 1 states that all living organisms are made up of cells. So whether it's the largest organism or the smallest organism, the smallest unit of life is known as a cell. Here we have some examples of different cells. As you can see, a cell is essentially it's just a water-filled balloon that contains organelles on the inside. In this case, you have a nucleus, and oftentimes, usually in most cells, you have more than one type of organelle, and this is what creates all those chemical reactions that make up life. Here's an example of an animal cell, and then we have a plant cell. And you can look closely at both of these, and you see that they have similar types of organelles, and they're all contained inside a fluid on the inside called the cytoplasm. And if we even take a look at the most primitive, smallest type cell we have, which is a bacteria, you can see that the bacteria is surrounded by a plasma membrane, very similar to the cell membrane of other cells, and it contains a bare minimum of materials on the inside, such as the nucleoid or circular DNA that may have given rise to the nucleus of more advanced cells. Alright, moving on to characteristic number 2, we find that all living things are based on a common universal code. We refer to this universal code as DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, and you're probably all familiar with this as the double helix that makes up all of our genetic material inside the cells. And it's that genetic material that really controls the heredity within a species. Okay, characteristic number 3 then, all living things respond to their environment. A good example of this would be the sunflower. The sunflower actually tracks the sun as it crosses the sky. So if you had time-lapsed photography of these sunflowers that you see in this field, you would notice that they all will track and move that flower to follow the sun throughout the day. Another example of an organism responding to its environment is when people sweat. Typically, we sweat in order to cool down. Sometimes people sweat in response to stress. Another example of when humans respond to their environment is when we shiver. Oftentimes, if you get cold, your body automatically responds by shivering in order to keep you warm. Characteristic number 4, living things reproduce. Here's an example of cells reproducing by simple division. We refer to this as asexual reproduction. Here's an example of sexual reproduction. You've all heard of the birds and the bees. Well, you actually have birds and bees that are distributing pollen from flower to flower. And here you see the fruits of that labor. The seeds inside the fruit are actually the fertilized eggs of the plants, and the fruit itself is the ovary. And of course, there's sexual reproduction in animals. Most animals will fertilize an egg with the sperm. Alright, Characteristic number 5. Living things grow and develop. Here's an example of growth and development in plants. You start with a seed, which then takes root and grows as a seedling, and then, if everything goes all right, someday you may end up with a large tree. Of course, another example with this is with humans. We start out as babies, and given the right circumstances, we grow, we get bigger, a little bit older, and still bigger, and then, if we're one of the lucky ones, we get to see old age. Oh, and does anybody recognize anybody famous? Yeah, right there. You've got Betty White. Oh, I thought I'd make it interesting, and there's Betty White in her 20s. All right. Characteristic number 6. Living things obtain and use energy. Here's some examples of how humans get their energy. I don't know about you guys, but every one of these pictures makes me hungry. All organisms, large or small, need to obtain and use energy. We don't usually think of plants as needing to obtain and use energy, mostly because they seem to do it automatically. But in reality, plants have to work very hard to collect sunlight energy, and then they get to utilize that for their own metabolism. Characteristic number 7. Living things maintain a stable internal environment. We usually think of this as homeostasis. Every organism, whether it's large or small, needs to maintain some sort of internal equilibrium, whether that's maintaining a body temperature or maintaining an internal chemistry within their cells. It's always referred to as homeostasis. The human body is always trying to maintain a constant internal temperature. When you get cold, your body goes into an automatic shiver state, which is an attempt to try and maintain your internal body temperature. So shivering then is a process that helps maintain homeostasis. Other organisms try to maintain a constant body heat in other ways. Seals, for example, use blubber. A thick layer of blubber helps to maintain internal body heat, even though they swim in 0-degree temperature water or lie on top of an ice sheet where it's sub-zero. So this seal is maintaining a state of homeostasis. And finally, characteristic number 8 says, taken as a group, living things evolve. Now, one of the things that you'll find out is this idea, this is the big idea in biology. This is central to all of biology. So, what does that mean? Well, it means that the theory of evolution is what ties all branches of biology together. All the different studies in biology, they all have bits of evidence that point towards life on Earth evolving over long periods of time. So, how do we know that groups of living organisms have evolved or changed over time? Well, one of the primary pieces of evidence that we use comes from the fossil record. The example that you see here is Archaeopteryx. It looks like on the surface that perhaps it's a fossil of a bird, but if we take a little closer look, you can actually see that there are claws and teeth that birds don't have, but dinosaurs do have. So this particular dinosaur or fossil shows characteristics of both birds and dinosaurs, clearly showing a link. So there you have it. All of the characteristics of living things. Don't forget, every organism needs to exhibit all 8 of those characteristics for us to consider them to be living.